Today what I'm going to talk about is significance of prognostication in hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative early breast cancer patients. So is prognostication important in hormone receptor positive EBCs? The straight answer is very clearly yes. Because today we are really living in an era where there's paradigm shift in breast cancer treatment, and Dr. Goswami also talked about lung cancer and many other cancers as well. So we are really living in an era of de-escalation beyond surgery. We have moved on greatly from maximum tolerated dose in the 1970s to minimum effective dose today. So what is the importance of this is it really avoids unnecessary physiological and financial toxicity and improves quality of life for the patients. So what we need to really remember is more is not always better and less is not always inferior. So having said that, now what are the really indicators of prognostication in hormone receptor positive disease? Have we gone beyond TNM, PRPR, HER2 and P67? Are there any other methods? Earlier we have all relied on TNM and tumor size and lymph node status used to be very critical, but more and more evidence has been generated that small tumors can be aggressive, and relying on tumor size is not the right way to treat, because you can undertreat many patients. And this is really summarized in multiple research publications, and one of the best one is the one by Elizabeth Coleman, Larry Norton and Joan Massart from Memorial Sloan, where they absolutely say that biology trumps anatomy. So clinical dilemma in treating these hormone receptor positive, HER2 negative EBCs is really which of these patients are going to develop. Because they tend to, amongst the breast cancer, they tend to do well as in comparison to triple negative. But having said that, it's not like none of those patients ever recur. So it is really important to understand which early stage breast cancer patients with hormone positive, HER2 negative disease, whom to treat with chemotherapy and whom not to give chemotherapy. And prognostic tests or tools really help clinicians understand the tumor biology and treat accordingly. All of you know about the online calculators and equations for risk prediction, such as Predict from NHS, Adjuvant Online, Nottingham Prognostic Index, and IHC4, which is essentially ERPR, HER2, and P67. So while these tools are really quick, they are free, and you can explain to the patient right then and there about her risk of breast cancer recurrence and plan the treatment. They have certain limitations, and primarily they arise from the fact that these are all developed postmenopausal Caucasian women, and so they tend to underestimate benefits of chemotherapy in small biologically aggressive tumors, as well as in younger patients they tend to overestimate survival. And there is a general lack of standardization and utility, along with the lack of validation across diverse populations. These are primarily developed and validated in US and UK. There are multiple reports that these tools perform suboptimally in Asian cohorts, and you can see these citations here. Next, the other tool we have today for understanding the hormone positive disease is prognostic test. And I think all of you are aware of this field is led by Oncotype DX and MammaPrint for over more than 2 decades. So prognostic tests really understand the tumor biology and predict the risk of distant recurrence, and based on the treatment can be planned. Oncotype, MammaPrint have been in multiple guidelines such as NCCN, ESMO, NICE and ASCO, and they have definitely improved quality of life of women, for patients in the Western countries, thousands of them. But the real question is, do they work across all ethnicities equally well? There is a lot of data publications from Oncotype DX as well as MammaPrint. You can see here MammaPrint clearly performs differently in Asian patients versus the European patients. You can see here in European patients, the high risk patients are about between 35 to 60, but in Asia, the high risk patients are about 80 to 86%. So the low risk patients are only about 15% in Asia, in Japan and in Korea, versus in the West, in Europe, the low risk percentage was much higher than in Asia. So this really puts a question in everybody's doubt. Oncotype has been shown to work also equally differently in blacks, in Hispanics and white Americans from each other. So this is the reason behind why ICMR has not included these Western tests in our guidelines. because they say that there is the clinical utility of these tests has not been proved sufficiently on Indian patients to be very specific. So this was and this, the reason behind why ICMR has said that is because the way the patients are diagnosed in India, in Asia in general, extending up to Middle East versus in the West, is our patients are diagnosed at a much younger age, a decade earlier. Median age is 48 versus 60 is the median age in the West. Our patients come with a stage 2 symptomatic detection, stage 2 disease, higher tumor burden as against in the West, where they are screen detected, mammography detected, and so they are much smaller tumors, and hence the tumor biology is less aggressive. So in short, our problem is really disease at a younger age and with a slightly aggressive disease, grade 3 disease, high P67, one lymph node positive disease, and hence we need a prognostic test that would encompass the tumor biology of our patients, which can be slightly aggressive, and that was really the goal behind developing CanAssist breast. OncoStem is an 11-year-old startup based in Bangalore, and CanAssist breast is entirely developed in Bangalore in our central lab, and it is validated the world over, and I'll go through the data. So what is CanAssist breast? It's a immunohistochemistry based prognostic test. We perform immunohistochemistry for 5 biomarkers. Those IHCs are graded. The IHCs are performed on Roche's automated Ventana machine, and the slides are then graded by trained oncopathologists, and the information from this goes into our machine learning based algorithm, which is once again developed by us. And that algorithm in the end gives us a risk score, which is a number between 0 and 100. If CanAssist breast risk score is 15.5 or more, patient is considered to have a lower risk of breast cancer recurrence, and treatment can be planned accordingly. Typically, 70% patients fall in this category. As against, if the risk score is 15.6 or beyond, we consider the patient to have a higher risk of breast cancer recurrence, and that patient might benefit from taking chemotherapy. CanAssist breast has so far been validated on close to 4,000 patients in India, in 3 different trials in the US and in multiple countries in Europe. It has high accuracy, NPV of 95%, and which is comparable to Western tests. The patent for the 5 biomarkers, I will get to the names of the biomarkers in a minute. The patent is granted in multiple geographies, and we have many international peer-reviewed publications. So we often get this question, does CanAssist breast use ERPR, HER2 and P67? And people even go to the extent of asking me which is the 5th marker. So the short answer is we don't use any of these 4 or 5 biomarkers. What we certainly understand the importance of ERPR, HER2 and P67. By no means we want to belittle them, but since anyway for every patient ERPR, HER2 is done, we don't believe in doing that once again in CanAssist breast. We go beyond proliferation and hormonal indices. What we look at are these 5 biomarkers, CD44, 2 cadherins, and 2 ADC transporter proteins, ADCC4 and 11. And why these 5 biomarkers is because this is how cancer typically progresses. Cancer begins in the duct as a small tumor, and those cells really are essentially epithelial cells. They need to become mesenchymal, invade, lose the cell addition, enter the bloodstream, and then disseminate and form another tumor elsewhere after going through MET again from mesenchymal become epithelial. So in all of these steps, these are the key proteins that are really important, that are really needed for the cell, and hence we look at these 5 biomarkers, and these are the IHC pictures of these 5 biomarkers. This is the paper in which we published the development of CanAssist breast algorithm back in 2018. And by now we have multiple publications, analytical validations, multiple clinical validations as well. CanAssist breast has also been shown to work not only on tumor tissues, FFP sections, but tissue microarrays made from multiple blocks as well. This is the global validation. So far, CanAssist breast has been validated in 21 different clinical studies across US, in Spain, Germany, Italy, Austria, and the Netherlands, and in 12 different studies in India. Now coming to the data of all these studies, these are all the publications. So coming to the data, this is really the proof of the pudding. CanAssist breast essentially segregates all the patients who have early stage hormone positive, HER2 negative disease into 2 categories: low risk for breast cancer recurrence and high risk for breast cancer recurrence. This is the Kaplan-Meier survival graph showcasing distant metastasis-free survival versus time in months. And CanAssist breast has segregated statistically significantly this entire cohort of patients into which was the patients were treated with chemotherapy plus endocrine therapy. About 70% patients low risk, 31% high risk, statistically highly significant. The low risk patients do have a higher DMFS of 94%. One can argue that some of these low risk patients got benefit of chemotherapy, and hence we looked at patients who were treated with endocrine therapy alone in a separate sub-cohort. And as you can see here, the low risk patients do have comparable NPV or higher DMFS of 95%, and the high risk patients have lower DMFS. So all of these patients were actually considered to have clinically low risk, and therefore they were not given chemotherapy in retrospect. But CanAssist best found this about 20% patients who have higher risk of breast cancer recurrence, and they indeed have recurred and may have benefited if chemotherapy was administered. So this is to showcase that CanAssist best has a high NPV of 94%. We often get this question that our patients tend to have breast cancer at a younger age. How well does CanAssist best work under 50 versus over 53 versus post-menopausal? So you can see here that CanAssist best, whether patients are under 50 or above 50, CanAssist best very statistically significant manner segregates them into low risk versus high risk. Proportions are also similar. The DMFS is slightly better in post-menopausal women, 94 versus 93, and under 50 women. This is to showcase that CanAssist best works independent of age. What about lymph node status? Since our patients often get diagnosed with one node positive, T2N1s are really the most commonly seen tumor in India. So we looked at sub-cohort of patients in which patients were segregated based on lymph node status. So lymph node negative versus lymph node positive. Up to 3 lymph nodes were included in this analysis. And I can see here that whether patients are lymph node negative or positive, CanAssist based segregation is statistically highly significant in both cases. However, please note that the proportions of patients diagnosed as segregated as low risk versus high risk is different. In node positive, lot less patients are segregated as low risk. But the DMFS is even in node positive is 92%, whereas in node negative it is 95%. Now, how do you? This is again the question that we often get. That I often see patients who are post-menopausal T2 tumors, but node negative. So they are clinically low risk, but should I give her chemotherapy or not because she is T2? So how does CAB help in understanding how to treat such patients? So we looked at all of the patients which were considered clinically low risk, and that is T1 lymph node negative or T1 T2 lymph node negative. So they were clinically low risk, and retrospectively they were prevented. They were not given chemotherapy for the reasons that they were considered clinically low risk. And here we looked at how does CanAssist best segregate these patients. So CanAssist is able to find 7 to 10% patients in the T1 negative or T1 T2 lymph node negative patients who actually have highly aggressive small tumors, lymph node negative tumors, and CanAssist best is able to segregate them, and they have definitely recurred and have ended up having a lower DMFS. So CanAssist best really identifies these highly aggressive small tumors from clinically low risk patients, and that is mainly because it looks at tumor biology beyond anatomy as well as beyond what is routinely looked at, which is ERPR, HER2 and P67. CanAssist, and this is a very nice editorial which Professor Cliff Harris had written in NEJM in response to TAILORx low risk data, that biology before anatomy in early breast cancer, and we really genuinely believe that CanAssist best helps you understand the tumor biology underlying the tumor recurrence, whether the tumor is small or big, and hence it's able to find the high risk patients among clinically low risk patients. Now coming to do CanAssist best high risk patients get chemotherapy benefit. So here we looked at the data differently. We looked at all of the patients stratified by CanAssist breast as low risk for breast cancer recurrence, and then tried to assess whether they were given chemotherapy or not. So the patients in blue line got endocrine therapy, the red line got only endocrine therapy. So as you can see, when CanAssist best segregates patients as low risk for breast cancer recurrence, even if you add chemotherapy to her regime, it is not beneficial. The KM curves, the two lines are overlapping at 96% DRFI, which showcases that low risk patients do not benefit from adding chemotherapy in their regime. On the contrary, the KM curve on the right hand side showcases that these were all the patients segregated as high risk by CanAssist breast, and in these high risk patients, if chemotherapy is omitted, look at the red line, the patients tend to recur more compared to patients who did well when the chemotherapy was added to their regime. So this difference in survival in the DRFI, this difference in the interval is what is called chemotherapy benefit, which is only seen in patients who have a high risk of breast cancer recurrence as per CanAssist breast. I spoke about how different tools can work differently across different ethnicities. So we were curious if CanAssist breast would work equally well across different geographies. So we looked at the validation of CanAssist breast, as I mentioned, in US and in multiple countries in Europe. And here is the data comparing Indian subcohort versus the Caucasian subcohort. As you can see, whether patients were given chemoendocrine therapy or endocrine therapy alone, in Indian versus Caucasian subcohort, CanAssist breast-based risk stratification is statistically significant across 4 KM curves, and even the proportions are similar, which is what is important as against mama print. Where in Indian versus Caucasian cohort, when patients are treated with CET, it's 70:30, and when patients are treated with ET alone, it's about 80:20, indicating CanAssist breast goes beyond these age and ethnicity barriers. This data was published last year in early January in the breast. Now, this is all this data that I showcased until now is predicting risk of breast cancer recurrence from 5 years, up to 5 years from diagnosis. As you all know, hormone receptor positive patients tend to recur up to 10 to 15 years from diagnosis. So we were curious how would CanAssist breast, whether it will predict the up to 10-year recurrences or not, since we developed it on 5-year recurrences. But the biology it looks at is so important, so we thought it will predict or not. So we were curious, and such kind of validations are not possible in retrospective studies since the follow-ups are not that long. So we approached multiple trials, multiple countries in which who have conducted these prospective randomized trials, and one of them is TEAM, which stands for tamoxifen exemestane adjuvant multinational. TEAM trial was conducted in Europe with 12 years follow-up across 9 different countries, and one of the centers was Leiden University Medical Center in the Netherlands. They had 480 tissues preserved with them. We requested if they could give us those tissues to validate CanAssist breast, and they agreed and they gave us the tumor tissues. In this trial, they randomized patients prospectively for sequential tamoxifen plus exemestane or 5 years of PXE alone, exemestane alone. The cohort was very interesting. It was all postmenopausal cohort. About 67% patients were node positive. More than 55% had T2 tumors, and about 28% patients had G3 tumors. Sorry, this is an error. And most importantly, despite having such clinically high risk features, 78% of the patients did not get chemotherapy. So we were really curious if CanAssist breast would segregate these patients into low risk versus high risk accurately. And here is a long story short. This is the TREAM trial. This is under review, so I can't reveal much of the data. But whether we are looking at total cohort or exemestane arm or the sequential arm, CanAssist breast-based risk stratification of low risk versus high risk is statistically significant across all 3 graphs. And the low risk patients do enjoy better DMFS compared to high risk patients even at 10 years. So this is the first evidence of CanAssist breast able to predict risk of breast cancer recurrence up to 10 years. And this is a sub-cohort of that cohort, which is entirely only node positive. We are looking at the 67% cohort, which is entirely node positive, and even in lymph node positive, CanAssist breast can predict up to 10 years recurrences, which is really the first time we are showcasing this kind of data, and it will really go a long way to build confidence in our patient population's predictiveness. Now moving on to until CanAssist breast came, we were using P67, Luminal AD, etc., or online tools. So how does CanAssist breast compare with all these tools? So P67 is one of those markers where some people love it and other clinicians just love to hate it. And that is because the cutoffs keep changing, and the P67 staining and grading is also not so easy. Given that currently the latest cutoff P67 under 5% is considered low risk, between 6 and 29 is considered intermediate, and beyond 30% is considered high risk. So if you look at P67 based risk stratification, you will save about 50% patients from chemotherapy considering low risk. 35% patients fall in the intermediate risk and 14 high risk. In the head-to-head comparison on the same patients, CanAssist breast segregated 75% patients as low risk and the remaining 25% as high risk. So we definitely CanAssist based is able to segregate a lot more patients compared to P67, and we interestingly, as per the guidelines, as per the latest guidelines, the intermediate P67% range patients are subjected to prognostic testing to understand the risk and then plan treatment. So we looked at how does CanAssist segregate these intermediate risk patients, and you can see here out of the intermediate P67 risk category, 74% patients were segregated as low risk by CanAssist, indicating there are really a lot more patients in intermediate risk who do not benefit from chemotherapy. Look at the high NPV at 95%, indicating there is really probably no need of chemotherapy for these patients. And what is the concordance of CanAssist or recertification of CanAssist in low P67? This is something we get often. We see no correlation to P67, so we looked at this data, and very interestingly, we see that in low P67 as well. CAB low risk patients were 81%, and in ET alone, they treated low P67 as well. CanAssist was able to segregate 88% patients as low risk with a really good DMFS of 96%. So this really showcases the value of P67 in segregating patients into low risk versus high risk, and the importance of CanAssist, more importantly, to look at the biology and reassess the patients better. Coming to comparison of CanAssist with the Nottingham Prognostic Index. Long story short, once again, CanAssist the 74% patients as low risk. NPI does 6 groups. They are segregated into 3 groups: good prognostic, moderate, and poor prognostic. Good prognostic in the Indian population was only 38% versus CanAssist with 74 versus 26. Low risk versus high risk. Majority of NPI patients fell in the intermediate or moderate group. Interestingly, CanAssist was able to find high-risk patients among clinically low-risk patients. Look at the T1 tumors. 16% patients were called as high-risk by CanAssist and 0.1% by poor prognostic by NPI. Similarly, in N0 patients as well, 14% patients were stratified as high-risk by CanAssist and none by NPI. And also CanAssist on the other hand, in clinically high-risk patients, N1 tumors or G3 tumors, CanAssist is able to segregate at least 40 to 60% patients as low risk, as against these NPI tool, which is hardly segregating any of these clinically low risk patients as actually low risk. Clinically high risk patients as actually low risk patients. So this is because they give way too much importance on the clinical parameters and not on the tumor biology. And we saw the same thing with NPI and with PREDICT as well. And you can see the hazard ratios of CanAssist versus NPI and PREDICT. Only CanAssist is significant across different subgroups of cancers such as N0, N1, G2, G3s, whereas NPI or PREDICT, the hazard ratios were not significant across different categories. They were only significant in the total. So once again, indicating that CanAssist based segregation is a lot more accurate. And finally, coming to the proportions of patients that are considered to that are segregated as low risk versus high risk, CanAssist will segregate about 70% patients, whether they are Indian, European, or US. Whereas NPI has done only 11% patients as low risk in India, as against 50 to 55% in US and Europe. And PREDICT has segregated 35% patients as low risk who are of Indian origin, and about 70% plus from the Caucasian patients. So this once again showcases that these tools are really developed on their patients and they suit best their patients. Coming to comparison of CanAssist with Oncotype DX, as you can see here, CanAssist Oncotype DX have good concordance, about 83% concordance on the low risk stratification. Out of the and if you look at the NPVs, about 93% of CanAssist NPV as against 92% of Oncotype DX, so it's very comparable. While the CanAssist segregated 83% as low risk, Oncotype did 90%, but between the two low risk, the concordance is 83%, which is very high considering Optima prelim trial where the concordances were under 60%. This data has been published in Cancer Medicine 2 years ago. Coming to comparison of CanAssist with MammaPrint, once again the same thing. CanAssist segregated 67% patients as low risk. MammaPrint did 55%, and between the two low risk, we had 85% concordance, indicating you could use CanAssist equally, but with the 1/5 the cost and the concordance that both tests would call the same patient low risk is very high. Now, all this is data which is great, but how is it really helping our patients today? So this is so we have started selling CanAssist breast. We have been in the market for last 6 years, since middle of 2016, and so far more than 350 doctors across 40 different cities in India, in Turkey, UAE, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh have used CanAssist based on more than 3,000 patients to plan treatment. And these patients, about 71% patients were considered to have low risk and have been planned, have skipped chemotherapy. Private and public insurances have reimbursed cost of this. It is not a routine, but it's on a case by case basis. And we are speaking with Ayushman Bharat as well on this. And what are the clinical characteristics of these patients? So you can see here, majority are actually over 50, majority are T2 tumors, and majority are lymph node negative as of today. And finally, I would end with the 3 case studies that we have had. There was one patient who was 31-year-old who was recently married and wanted to have a baby, was diagnosed with grade 2 T2 tumors, 40% K67. Her preference was to have a baby. If she were to have chemotherapy, because considering her age and grade 2 disease, stage 2 disease, she may go for chemotherapy, and then that would lead to complications. Then there was second patient, Jessie, 36 years old, who wanted to, once again, did not want to have chemotherapy. She was young, T2 disease. And the third patient was slightly elderly, 56 years old, and once again had T2 tumor with grade 3 disease. All these 3 patients were actually CanAssist breast low risk, and none of them got chemotherapy, and all of them are doing well. Mrinal, in fact, even had a baby before she was started on endocrine therapy. So right after surgery, she had her baby first, and then she was put on endocrine therapy. So this is really very interesting to know that because they were all classified as low risk and they really did well without chemotherapy for 5 years, we have followed them as well. And part of this prospective data was published in 2019. So to summarize, why CanAssist breast? Because CanAssist breast has multi-country validation. It is developed on our patients who are younger, who have slightly aggressive disease. The cost is very affordable. It's a made in India, make in India innovation. Price 4 to 5 times lower than competitors. It uses cutting edge AI ML based algorithm, and the biomarkers can be targeted to make Herceptin like drugs in future. It is quality driven, ISO CAP. It is run in our CAP and Enable accredited lab, and we have ISO 13485 for the test. And our turnaround time is the fastest 7 to 8 days. So this is just to summarize that it is a robust tool which is IHC based, it's affordable, it can do, it has good concordance with multiple genomic tests as well as with far better segregation than any local tools we have used, P67, luminal AD, etc. 10-year follow-up is showcased. So we believe that CanAssist breast is our solution for our problems where the cancer is different from the rest. Thank you all for attending, and we'll be happy to take questions.